The views and opinions expressed on the following program are those of the host and guests and do not necessarily represent those of any organization, including One Generation Away.
The freedom of a people to choose its leaders is the root of liberty.
Keep alive this experiment in liberty.
Liberty, in case you've forgotten, is the soul's right to breathe.
Government should be very minimal in protecting liberty.
Peace cannot be purchased at the cost of liberty.
The sturdy ground of liberty.
Liberty once lost is lost forever.
Fight for their liberty and for our security.
Guarantees individual liberty.
This great republic, born alone in liberty.
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 Liberty. Liberty.
Just how much do you want liberty?
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner,
a production of LibertyNation.com.
Cutting through the double talk, taking on the topics, going after what the politicians really mean, and making it all clear. For your freedom and your liberty. Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
The plot to rig an election and destroy a presidency. We'll talk about it. Welcome back in to Liberty Nation Radio, a production of LibertyNation.com and heard from coast to coast on the Radio America Network. And as we await the results of two investigations into the origins of Obama administration surveillance of the Trump campaign that led to the special counsel investigation, we'll be joined by Andrew McCarthy, who's just released the definitive book on the subject. Meanwhile, Democrats float the R word, recession, wishing and hoping and praying that a single inverted metric means the economy is headed for a fall. LibertyNation.com's acclaimed economic correspondent Andrew Moran will join us to sort out recession fact from fiction. And LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor Scott Cosenza jumps on board for Talkin' Liberty and a new David Hogg gun control manifesto that will effectively terminate the Second Amendment.
Say what? Say what? Say what? One more time.
We commence the proceedings with our signature segment, Say What, where we roll out some of the most wacky, astonishing, damnable, and ultimately revealing statements uttered by politicians and the chattering class. Now, even in the heart of summer, deep in the heart of summer, President Trump can't help but make one bombshell statement after another. This week, in the wake of that dust-up over members of the Squad visiting Israel, first they were going, then they were barred from the country, then they were unbarred and decided not to go anyway, Trump said and then later repeated that with blatantly anti-Semitic members of Congress like Rashida Tlaib,
where's the Democratic Party gone? Where have they gone where they're defending these two people over the state of Israel? And I think any Jewish people that vote for a Democrat, I think it shows either a total lack of knowledge or great disloyalty.
Of course, that statement unleashed a torrent of attacks from leftists, particularly on the historically sensitive charge of disloyalty used against the Jews for centuries. But of course, Trump meant disloyalty to their people, to Israel, not the U.S. But of course, that didn't make the Democrats' talking points. Democrats like Congressman Ted Deutsch tried to say that Trump meant loyalty to him.
It's outrageous. It's offensive. And it's dangerous. I don't know who the president is talking about. Is he suggesting we're being disloyal to him? Is he suggesting that he knows what it means to be loyal to my religion? It creates an environment that puts Jews at risk.
But wait, that's not all. New York Times contributor Wajat Ali went on CNN, of course, and took the argument to its limits, claiming hysterically that despite their constant terrorist attacks on Israel and their calls for the elimination of the Jewish state, he and his fellow Muslims stand with the Jews.
What I want to tell all my Jewish cousins from other mothers is that the Muslims are with you, and that we see through this. We're not going to let him use Jews and Israel and anti-Semitism as a wedge to divide us along the religious and racial lines. We're in this together. We know he attacks black women, Muslims, women, Latinos, immigrants, and Jews. And we know that white supremacists are the #1 domestic terror threat in America, coming for all of us. We're going to unite. We're going to have our disagreements about Israel, that's fine, but we're going to unite against the common threat that is coming against all of us, which is white supremacy.
I'm trying to remember a single occasion where Donald Trump said anything negative about Jewish people, but nevertheless, the white supremacists are coming for all of us, which actually begs the question, have any of you even met a white supremacist or a neo-Nazi? I never have. Not once. But lest you think Trump was the only one being attacked by the angry left this week, listen to a statement from a guy who's usually a darling of the left, but who dared to put the lie to the whole boycott, divest, and sanction movement against Israel, BDS, supported by the radically anti-Israeli left. Bill Maher.
BDS is a bullshit test by people who want to appear woke but actually slept through history class. It's predicated on this notion. I think it's very shallow thinking that the Jews are in Israel mostly white and the Palestinians are browner, so they must be innocent and correct, and the Jews must be wrong. As if the occupation came right out of the blue, that this completely peaceful people found themselves occupied. Forget about the intifada's and the suicide bombings and the rockets and how many wars.
Is it just me, or is that something you'd expect Trump to say? But no, it was Bill Maher. And after he said that, the squad went on social media and tried to spark a boycott of Maher's show. Of course they did. That's what they do. Another thing the left is good at is apologizing for their whiteness, their maleness, or in the case of Pocahontas, Senator Elizabeth Warren going in front of a group of actual Indians with a fawning apology for pretending to be an Indian.
Like anyone who's being honest with themselves, I know that I have made mistakes. I am sorry for harm I have caused. I have listened and I have learned a lot, and I am grateful for the many conversations that we've had together. It is a great honor to be able to partner with Indian country, and that's what I've tried to do as a senator, and that's what I promise I will do as President of the United States of America.
So how many times do you think she'll apologize for pretending to be an Indian? Well, apparently it's not hurting her. Pocahontas is on the rise in the Democratic presidential race. But the real story that's flown under the radar is that Kamala Harris, thought to be on the rise after attacking Joe Biden in the first debate, has actually been dropping like a rock in the polls. And as Gloria Borger, longtime political journalist, pointed out on CNN, Kamala is having trouble squaring her rhetoric, that of a social justice warrior, with her record as an aggressive prosecutor.
She was kind of like this souffle that rose after she took on Joe Biden during that first debate. And she did really well. And people said, wait a minute, I'm going to give her another look. And what happens when you get a second look is you go under a magnifying glass and you either continue to rise or you plateau or deflate. Effectively, people are saying, wait a minute, how about describing your record on crime when you were a prosecutor in California? You were tough on crime, not a bad thing, but now you're saying that, well, Joe Biden was too tough on crime, so are you a bit of a hypocrite there?
Kamala will be in the next debate coming up next month in September, along with about a dozen of the other candidates, about half the field qualifying for that debate as of now. And we close today with Fredo, the name that will now be attached to Chris Cuomo in perpetuity after he went postal last week on a guy who called him Fredo and threatened to, among other things, throw the guy down a staircase. This week, the Trump-deranged younger brother of one New York governor and son of another went on CNN and said, Trump doesn't worry enough about the things a president should worry about, and he sleeps way too well.
Shouldn't that visit his sleep every night? Shouldn't he process that pain and lose sleep? Isn't that what the job is about? Doesn't he see their faces? Can you imagine all of this on your shoulders? How about this? Care more. Mr. President, you may sleep less.
I wonder if Fredo is actually aware that Trump famously only sleeps about 4 hours a night to begin with. But that's way too much for Fredo Cuomo. Is this guy a sad sack or what? Quick break, and then we're back to discuss Democrats wishing and hoping and praying for a recession.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Exhausted by all the fake news? On LibertyNation.com's YouTube channel, facts and fresh, bold analysis are what you get without the leftist spin. Subscribe today to the LibertyNation.com YouTube channel because
truth
is making
a
comeback.
We believe that all men are entitled to blessings of liberty.
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Certain people in the media are trying to build up because they'd love to see a recession.
Why are people talking about a recession? And you say it's here.
There are indicators that the U.S. could be headed for a recession.
Could be headed for a recession.
Inching toward a recession.
They say potential recession on the horizon.
Happening now. Recession fears.
What are the odds that you see of a recession?
Recession?
Recession. The United States is taking a step toward recession. What does that mean for this presidency?
It's political suicide.
Growing fears about a possible recession.
Growing fears of a possible recession.
At some point, there's going to be a recession.
All right, the R word has reared its head again. One obscure economic metric inverts, and all of a sudden the left says we're headed for a recession. Are we? Joining us to provide an adult, informed opinion on the matter is Andrew Moran, economics correspondent for LibertyNation.com. Hello, Andrew.
Hello, thank you for having me.
My pleasure, as always. So, okay, Andrew, even the left had to begrudgingly admit the economy's been sound since Trump took office. But then, one day recently, we got what's called an inverted yield curve, meaning a short-term bond suddenly offered a higher rate than a long-term bond. And so, the Chicken Littles are crying and hoping and praying that we're headed for a certain recession, to which you say what?
Well, first, I would say that how rich and privileged are these people that they want job losses and shuttered businesses and lost income just to oust someone they hate from public office.
Right.
But no, I don't anticipate a recession or even a severe stock market crash for now. The main indicator, like you say, is the inverted yield curve. Now, it does have a good record. It's predicted 9 of the last 10 recessions. But I think this time around, it's not a reliable indicator, mainly because the central banks have distorted financial markets so much over the years with all its money printing and sub-zero interest rates and intervening into the stock market and all these other unconventional tools that central banks around the world have employed. Just this week, Sweden started selling 10-year bonds at negative 0.25%. So this is important because it shows that investors are desperate for any type of yield. So they will turn to the U.S. markets, which will then suppress or limit long-term Treasury yields. The inversion might also signal that the Fed is about to introduce accommodative measures, and that is happening this month. It slashed interest rates by a quarter point. It's expected to do the same next month. And there's even a growing segment of the market that anticipates a full point cut by the end of the year, which is what Trump has demanded in recent tweets.
And which certainly won't hurt his re-election chances. Now, can you explain to us civilians, Andrew, how somebody would invest in an instrument that has a negative yield? I mean, I don't understand. Why would you put your money in something that's guaranteed, that promises to lose money?
Well, one of the reasons is that if the rest of the market is offering even deeper negative yields, then you want to have the worst possible one. So right now you can buy a 10-year Japanese bond for negative 0.1%, but then, like I just said, Sweden's selling negative 0.25% over a 10-year bond. So of course, you want the lesser of the evil. So that's why everyone's flooding the U.S. Treasuries, because the U.S. has yet to introduce any sub-zero bonds or sub-zero interest rates. Now, Steven Mnuchin did entertain the idea a couple of years ago of bringing in negative rates, but that has yet to happen. Also, I should note that Janet Yellen, before she left the Fed, she said that the central bank could introduce negative rates should there be a substantial economic downturn.
So this is a product of something that you're pointing out that the president has pointed out on a few occasions, and that is that most of the rest of the world is struggling economically. Now, how much does the low growth of EU nations and other soft socialist countries, the kind that are offering negative yields, how much does that actually affect the U.S. economy?
Well, it's important because President Trump has demanded that the U.S. exports more and becomes a manufacturing country again, and that everyone imports from the U.S. So if the rest of the world is struggling economically, then they're not going to be importing as much U.S. goods as the president wants. So all the other countries that are employing these unconventional measures, it'll provide a short-term boost, but long-term they're going to suffer greatly. So Trump wants the higher exports, but then the conundrum is that if these other countries are not advancing, then the U.S. is going to be hurt that way.
Now, quantify for us, Andrew, the effects right now in real time of Trump's so-called trade war with China and the tariffs and all of it, and how badly is China being hurt by this compared to the U.S.?
Well, Chinese officials, they're trying to save face. So they're saying that China is going to be able to weather the economic storm, and it's just going to be a short-term stagnation. But when you look at all the measures that China is employing, either in Beijing or in the People's Bank of China, it shows that they're really concerned. They recently lowered the reserve requirement ratios. They just introduced a new benchmark when it comes to offering mortgages. They're providing stimulus to provinces. They're trying to get agriculture to increase by giving them subsidies, which, if you ask local farmers, it isn't really working because they keep starting and pausing over and over again. So the trade war is impacting in China significantly. Will it hurt the U.S.? Right now, China just announced a $75 billion retaliation tariff. So the U.S., I think, will be just as affected as China. A lot of President Trump supporters will want to hear that, but from the free market fetishists, again, as Joe Schaefer likes to say, will warn you about the consequences of these trade disputes.
Yes. Free market fetishist Andrew Moran, also known as the economics correspondent for LibertyNation.com. Andrew, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
That is Andrew Moran, economics correspondent for LibertyNation.com. Stay right there, because when we return, we'll bring on Andrew McCarthy, author of the explosive and acclaimed new book on the plot to rig an election and destroy a presidency.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Where can you find honest political commentary with sobering analysis, accountability, deconstructing threats to our liberty, and boldly reporting the truth? Subscribe to the LibertyNation.com YouTube channel, where facts matter.
Far more important than my political future, and far more important than yours, the well-being of our country.
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
The real collusion in the 2016 election was not between the Trump campaign and the Kremlin. It was between the Clinton campaign and the Obama administration. That's the conclusion of an important new book, Ball of Collusion, the plot to rig an election and destroy a presidency, assiduously researched and authored by the widely respected Andrew McCarthy. It unmasked the plan to lure Trump campaign operatives, starting with George Papadopoulos, into a trap that led to surveillance of the Trump campaign by Obama's FBI and ultimately the Robert Mueller special counsel investigation. But after Mueller's almost 2-year-long probe came up with nothing on President Trump other than claims by the left that he tried to obstruct an investigation that discovered no crime, the tables are turning. Trump's Justice Department is investigating the investigation. And we will soon learn about the origins of this plan, which many Trump supporters have labeled a soft coup d'etat. You know Andy McCarthy, former federal prosecutor, from his many appearances on Fox News and elsewhere, and he joins us now. Mr. McCarthy, welcome to Liberty Nation Radio.
Well, thanks so much for having me.
I really appreciate it. Now, as we await the results of 2 Justice Department investigations on the matter, what do we already know as fact, not speculation or analysis, but indisputable fact, when it comes to the origins of the Obama Justice Department and intelligence assets spying on the Trump campaign?
Well, what I try to demonstrate in the book is that I think the investigation that we came to know as Crossfire Hurricane, which is the FBI counterintelligence investigation, formally, and I stress the word formally, opened in the end of July of 2016. And when I say I stress formally, I mean it really was form over substance. They were investigating this for a long time before then. What joins into that formal investigation are strands of intelligence that go back to the second half of 2015 and really begin more with foreign intelligence services and the CIA than the FBI. I think the FBI was kind of late to the game in the overall scheme of things. And it's clear that intelligence assets were used, whether you call them spies or informants or what have you, to monitor the Trump campaign. It's also clear that foreign counterintelligence law provisions were used to justify surveillance. This would be the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. And I think also not just the part of FISA that allows the government to monitor alleged agents of foreign powers, but also other aspects of FISA which allow the government to conduct other forms of surveillance and result in the incidental collection of intelligence on Americans. So I think there's a case that all of those things were used, and what there's cloudiness about, or what we really don't know in terms of the origins of the investigation, are exactly what triggered it and why. That the Trump campaign was monitored by the Obama administration using counterintelligence authorities and federal law is not something that ought to be subject to dispute. That clearly happened.
All right, let's talk about the infamous Steele Dossier. It was bankrolled as opposition research by the Clinton campaign, included all manner of scurrilous claims about Trump, and was then used by Obama's FBI to secure a FISA warrant to spy on the Trump campaign, as you outlined. 2 questions on that. Was the Steele Dossier the only basis for the FISA warrant? And do we know if anything in that dossier was true? Some of it, none of it?
Well, we know that it was not the only source for the FISA warrant. After all, the FISA warrant wasn't sought until mid-October. Mid-October of 2016, the FBI began getting the Steele Dossier reporting in early July, so a number of months went by. We also know from the redacted version of the reports that we've seen that there's other information, mainly about Russia and its operations against the election that are poured into the FISA application. But we also know from testimony from people from the FBI, particularly the former deputy director, Andrew McCabe, that had it not been for the Steele dossier, they would not have had enough evidence to claim that there was probable cause to believe that Carter Page was a foreign asset, namely a Russian asset. The Steele dossier contains the allegation that there was a conspiracy of cooperation in cyber espionage operations between the Trump campaign and Russia, and that Carter Page, who was the subject of the surveillance, was basically the go-between between the two camps, that is, between the Trump campaign on the one side and the Kremlin on the other. That allegation is contained in the Steele dossier. We don't have any reason to believe that there was any other such allegation against Carter Page. And I would point out that two things. Number one, FISA law requires that when you allege that someone's an enemy or an agent of a foreign power, that means that they are knowingly and willfully involved in clandestine activities on behalf of the foreign power that are in probable violation of federal law. So this is not something that somebody can inadvertently sort of stumble into. And secondly, I'd note that Carter Page was never charged, notwithstanding that the FBI and the Justice Department went 4 times to the FISA court and alleged that there was probable cause that he was a Russian agent. He's never been alleged or arrested or otherwise complained about in a formal way for being a Russian agent. So without the Steele dossier, they would not have had enough probable cause to seek anything on Page, and I don't think the Steele dossier gave it to them either. I think there's a lot of questions that ought to be directed at the FISA court for the way that the information they were given was handled, was analyzed. On the other thing that you've asked me about whether there was anything true in the Steele dossier, I think it would be wrong to say that there's nothing true in it, but the point is that there's nothing that is important that's true in it. So, for example, what I mean by that is the Steele dossier alleges that Carter Page took a trip to Russia in July of 2017. There's no doubt that that happened, and in fact, Page made no secret of it happening. So the fact that, that fact is alleged in the Steele dossier, but it's not a controversial fact. Nobody has denied that happened. What is in dispute is what happened when he was in Russia, where the Steele dossier alleges that he met with these top-level Kremlin officials, and Page himself vehemently denies that, and there's evidently been no corroboration that Steele's allegations were true.
Our guest is Andrew McCarthy, author of Ball of Collusion, The Plot to Rig an Election and Destroy a Presidency. Now, what did you discover, Andy, about the role President Obama himself might have played in this course of events? Or did he build in a sufficient plausible deniability?
Well, I think when things are operating the way they're supposed to be, counterintelligence investigations are done for the president. The fact that this was done as a counterintelligence investigation means that it was done for purposes of collecting intelligence in furtherance of the president's constitutional responsibility to protect the country from foreign threats. I make a big deal distinguishing counterintelligence investigations from criminal investigations. It's not just a formalistic distinction. There's a lot of substance to it. Criminal investigations are done in order to vindicate the rule of law in judicial proceedings, and it's got substantial oversight not only by the judiciary but by Congress's own laws, which is what the Justice Department enforces. And in that area of Justice Department and FBI responsibilities, we obviously do not want politics intruding on things like who gets charged and whether somebody gets indicted. By contrast, counterintelligence investigations are done only for the president. The only purpose of doing counterintelligence investigations is to gather information so that the president can protect the country against foreign threats to American interests.
That is Andy McCarthy, author of Ball of Confusion, the plot to rig an election and destroy a presidency. And he had a lot more to say, which we'll offer up for you on next week's show. Quick break, and then we're back with Talkin' Liberty.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
And now we welcome you to the portion of Liberty Nation Radio which we entitled Talkin' Liberty. It is self-explanatory, as is our regular contributor and constitutional lawyer and LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor Scott Cosenza. Go ahead, explain yourself. My parents used to say that to
I don't
me.
think we have enough time on that segment.
Go explain yourself.
No.
Are you not? Yeah, we'll call you self-explanatory as a personality as well as this segment. And Scott, David Hogg and the other Parkland survivors, the anti-gun radicals, now are emboldened by those twin mass shootings and they've released a gun control manifesto, which is downright breathtaking and which makes Cory Booker look like he's a Second Amendment advocate.
I just want to say one thing to start, which is that not all the survivors of the Parkland school, and it's a common mistake because the ones that oppose it aren't reported on. They're not celebrated. They're not, George and Amal Clooney are not having them over for brunch like they are with David Hogg.
Right.
And having dinners with New York Times editors. So, and get into Harvard, by the way, on SAT scores where no other white person gets into Harvard on. That's David Hogg for you. He's got this celebrity cachet. So,
Harvard actually, just to put a fine point on it, they admitted someone from Parkland who was a gun rights advocate, and then when they saw some old social media posts that were supposedly vile in some form, they de-admitted him. They renounced his admission.
That's what they get for going after somebody who's not woke. You know, that's the most important thing. That's why Hogg gets in. He's woke and he's a celebrity.
What kind of legs does this proposal have? Is this just a sound good for
let me go into
points,
just a couple details quickly, which is number one, they punish gun ownership, making it incredibly onerous. Annual licensing, significant training requirements that go on annually, along with commensurate fees. An assault weapons ban. An assault weapon to them, Tim, is any modern rifle with a centerfire magazine that fires a centerfire round, and all full-capacity magazines, any magazine over 10 rounds. So right away they take the universe of guns that are available to own, they shrink it massively. Confiscations, by the way. Then they make it onerous to actually comply with the law to go forward with the few guns that they will let you own. Then they attack manufacturers, removing civil protections, Tim, from lawsuits, and specifically direct federal agencies to attack the NRA. I mean, it goes on and on and on.
And, of course, the gun manufacturers. I mean, probably the biggest outcome of this would be that gun manufacturers would have so many lawsuits against them they couldn't. They just simply go out of business.
If it were enacted, it's a masterstroke of shutting them down. It's actually all you have to do is this one thing, and you don't actually have to shut them down. That'll just go ahead and take care of itself in a few short years.
This one weird trick.
Yeah, for sure.
There's one weird trick.
Just eliminate the right to keep and bear arms.
So where is this proposal going to go, though? I mean, this is so radical, and it does take advantage of the times we're in and the mass shootings and Trump being a white supremacist and all of that stuff. Does this have any legs? Is anybody taking this seriously beyond the fact that it was proposed?
I'm a better legal analyst than I am a political analyst. So I think punting is what I'm going to have to do to that question, Tim.
Fair enough. Let's move on to another Explosively controversial situation, the death of one Eric Garner on Staten Island for selling Lucy's.
Yes.
LOOSIES, one cigarette at a time.
Ruled a homicide, is important to remember, by the coroner. And if 5 years goes by and Officer Daniel Pantaleo has been fired. Tim, I know we both know we've had those moments throughout our lives at work where we do something horribly wrong, and make a major mistake, and we think, gee, I hope in 5 years I don't get fired for what just happened right now. Can you imagine? You do something that's worthy of termination and you get to stay on your job for 5 years. And here's the other thing. We haven't heard the last of this. I'm sure that the police union, Tim, is fighting this. And in fact, if there's anything to take away from this story, I would say it's these union contracts. That's where really where the rubber meets the road on these things. That's why it takes 5 years to fire somebody.
The head of the police union in New York, Patrick Lynch, held a press conference calling for Mayor de Blasio to resign because of this being done. I mean, I don't know what else they really could have done to try and soothe the savage beast other than to fire the cop. But the point is really more that the politicians are to blame because they're the ones that are setting the high tax rates. They're the ones that are saying, roll a guy like Eric Garner so we can look tough on crime. And the result is a guy like this dies when he had no business being treated that way. He wasn't committing a crime with a gun or with violence. He's just selling a loose cigarette in the street.
Talk about a recipe for disaster. The current brew right now in New York is the citizens are at the mercy of the police for whatever they do like this. And the police are completely not backed up by the political leadership either. Nobody it feels secure about their position. It's absolutely untenable and will yield some disaster, I predict.
I have no doubt. Let's switch the subject to an appeals court which says that Colorado electors don't have to vote for the winner of the state's popular vote. It's destroying the popular vote movement. And let me say, before you comment on this, Scott, that there is no popular vote. There's 50 popular votes in each state. The idea that somebody won more total votes across the country than someone else like Clinton did in 2016 and like Al Gore did in 2000 doesn't make any difference. That's not what the Constitution says.
It's a race nobody was running.
Right.
They won a race that nobody was running.
Precisely.
Well, the 10th Circuit here, so Colorado and some other there's been a movement in left political circles to basically require electors to follow the, quote, popular vote. They see that as a way around the restrictions of the Electoral College system.
But not the popular vote in their state.
Right, no.
The national
the
vote.
national pop.
Right.
Well, really, the Democrat, let's be honest.
So in other words, what this means is that Trump could win Colorado by 10 points, but if he loses the popular vote nationally, those electors are awarded to the Democrat.
Not awarded. They would be required to cast their vote for the Democrat.
Right.
And the 10th Circuit here has said that is not constitutional. The states cannot require the electors to vote for anyone. It's up to the elector. And what's called a faithless elector.
Right. And there were a few of them in 2016, about 7 or 8 of them.
There's often
total.
one or so.
Right.
But now, according in the 10th Circuit anyway, that's the rule. So we may see a split in the circuits on this. I think if we do, for sure, this will go to the Supreme Court and quickly. But for now, I think that this is likely to be the outcome of any appellate litigation, which is to say that the states cannot control how electors in the national election behave.
That's all the time we've got. Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Tim.
This program, Liberty Nation Radio and LibertyNation.com's own podcasts, The Uprising, hosted by Scott, with an occasional appearance by yours truly. Plus, The Rabbit Hole, Politics and Prose, where past is prologue, hosted by Mark Angelides. All of that available on demand at LibertyNation.com. So that is it for this week, but we'll be back at you next week, same time, same station. Till then, this is Tim Donner saying, stand up for liberty And we'll see you next time on Liberty Nation Radio.